activist, probably known more for the activism and less for the attack on liberal thought. You see, globalization is not uniform, either theoretically or practically. What does that mean? For example, in the United States and Europe, the theory of globalization is made almost a right liberal concept in ideology, which means that it provides the justification and the guidance of other economies, less developed, less globalized, so that it is justified. And the media, in the sense of TV and newspapers, are fully part of this game of obfuscation, diversion, and basically the denial of human rights. I talked about people who change their positions. Now, there is a very well-known politician in India, I'll name him later. He was the main author of a very important report from the South Commission. It was the first commission to be set up to bring about solidarity amongst the countries of the South. He was Secretary General. And the famous African leader, Tanzanian leader, Julius Nyerere, was the chairman of the South Commission. And if you can find it in a library, I strongly advise you read this report, Challenges to the Global South, the report of the South Commission. But you know, intellectuals can be very shifty people, because they can justify anything and they can learn to say anything. So this politician theorist who was going to be without a job, he looked for a job. And you know who he was? Manmohan Singh. So Manmohan Singh, in 1 year, from 1990, where he criticized globalization, had a transformation, and he praised globalization. And like many of the globalizers, he's very soft-spoken, but he's very careful to be on the right side of everyone. So after he made his speech as finance minister in 1991, and that was a real sweep of globalization in India, P.V. Narasimha Rao, the prime minister, congratulated him. So then Manmohan Singh was so overwhelmed that in the parliament lobby he kissed Manmohan Singh's hand. Now I don't know if he was confused about Manmohan Singh's gender, or he was just fitting out what he had to do. Since then, things have become worse. But under globalization, they will become worse. The word globalization is also misleading, because it seems to imply that you will have more or less the same path of development throughout the world. That's the ideology. But the fact is, you don't have the same path of development. Not nationally, not internally. Take, for example, the United States of America, long considered a very powerful economy. The US has unheard of unemployment. As a desperate measure, President Obama gave some welfare, which the Republicans opposed till the end. Detroit, where all the American cars were built, is closed down. There is considerable hysteria and xenophobia against people who come from abroad, especially the Hispanics, and especially from Mexico. And what has been the great achievement of the Americans? Well, one achievement, if you look at the media, look at TV, There are two films which have come often in the last 5 years. One is called Sea Biscuit, after a very small horse that became a champion. And the other is on Jimmy Braddock, an old boxer who became world champion. Why is this important even as an illustration? Because lots of Americans go to watch that TV serial, go and watch the movies, because this gives them hope that underdogs like Seabiscuit and Jimmy Braddock could do well. One of the original globalizers, a man called Jeffrey Sachs, also a Zionist, which I hope you know what that means. Indian government, by the way, is also now very pro-Zionist, after being pro-Palestinian for a long time. These people peddled this globalization. But it was when the World Bank, IMF, and other such organizations, including regional groupings like the European Community, Mercosur, etc., that globalization developed and the resistance to globalization developed. So globalization does not have only an economic aspect. Common economic outlay programs and resource investment programs. For instance, the one rule of globalization is that you must invest to create more capital for investment. You should not waste your income for welfare schemes, for the welfare of the working class, of the landless peasantry. You must also do development which gives you quick returns, which means that you are not for environmental development. So in India, you know, just in the little state of Uttarakhand, where we suffered very badly during the first part of the monsoon, there are 30 dams being built, and some were built and some have been smashed by the waters. 30 dams. You have the Narmada Dam, which Modi doesn't talk much about now, where lakhs were turned out, petty compensation. Same happened to the Chenoy Dam. And India, like a global power, is now going over to nuclear energy, despite the experience of Fukushima, and wrestling with the Americans who don't want to pay the full liability if something happens to the nuclear energy sector. So in other words, this is a very parasitic kind of path of development, and it shows. For instance, the top 1% of the American population has almost 99% of the wealth in all of America. So really it's not globalization. It's a new form of imperialism. And same thing as imperialism did. But it's much more dangerous because it's intellectual apparatus. Colleges, schools, books, newspapers, movies. I am sure some of you must be watching Hindi movies. Some might be watching Urdu movies and other movies. How many movies have you seen where the poor guys reverse and reorient development and give money to the poor? When I was your age or a bit younger, I remember seeing a movie called Do Bigha Zameen, which was just about a farmer who had lost his money and to Balraj Sahni, and to get it, he worked as a rickshaw puller in Calcutta. Then he had an accident, and even his 2 acres of land were taken away. And this has happened to millions of farmers in this country. Why do I mention this country? One, this country has illusions that it is a great country. I know what it's great about. Yeah, we have the atomic bomb, but that's not something you can play badminton with, which is India's current sport. And we have a solid propaganda machinery. So if you look at today's newspapers or tomorrow's newspapers, there will be talk of the decline in the value of the rupee. There will be other indicators of decline, but the newspapers will be quite robust. And they virtually all say the same thing. So globalization is an ideology. That ideology justifies the path of development of globalization. Just really not globalization. Take, for example, the case often cited of Japan in a crisis. China, an unusual case because it started off as socialist oriented and now is a thoroughly capitalist state. But since it has a communist party who are in leadership, etc., every year 1.5 million Chinese go above the poverty line. In India, we are still arguing of what is the poverty line. Because the neoliberals don't want to have a proper poverty line and expose themselves. Then this entire thing of investment. Now there are two kinds of investment. One is you invest and you generate more capital. Another is if you invest in human development and spread the gains of that development amongst the people. Okay, what does this have to do with human rights? Well, number one, I don't think anyone at this table accepts the concept of human rights as only being political rights. In fact, Baba Sahib Ambedkar, on the final day that the Constitution was prepared, said that we have got political rights, but we do not have economic and social equality. How long shall we live with these contradictions? It is still true. Even political rights are tricky. For example, any time there is a huge economic project that the people oppose, we get arrested, we get sent to bail, or we are sent notice after notice to appear before the magistrate, and we are lucky because we are middle class people. The poor are just thrown out of their land. I went to some of the areas of the Narmada Dam, and there were very nice shiny hand pumps, but they were embedded in sand, so there was no